The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
Well, I grew up in Conception Bay, South Newfoundland, which is what it's called now, and it was incorporated in about 1972. But as a kid growing up, it was a little rural community, and it wasn't very well populated. And since it became incorporated, it is now probably the fastest growing community in Newfoundland. It's about 17 miles west of St. John's, on the south shore of Conception Bay Highway in Newfoundland. How I got interested in the Mounted Police, my mom and I was about 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10, and my mom and I were shoveling the driveway. It was winter time, it was probably January, after Christmas I think, and my mom and I were shoveling the driveway so my dad could, when he came home from work with the heavy equipment that he operated, he could get off the highway. And I was taking a rest from shoveling and leaning on the shovel and the RCMP car, highway patrol car, and I knew it was a highway patrol car then because they had white doors. All the highway patrol cars had white doors. The highway patrol car, I could see him coming up the street, up the highway, and I'm leaning on the shovel and I'm looking at him, staring at him, and I'm following him as he's going by. And as he's going by, he waves. And I'm hooked. That's it, I'm hooked. I turned to my mom. I said to my mom, when I grow up, this is what I'm going to be, type thing. And from that day on, that was it. When I turned 18, my mom, bless her heart, and she's still alive, she's 83. When I turned 18, my mom suggested that I make application, and then you could make application in 1965, 66, you could make application at 18, and the processes, the interviews, the medicals, the background checks, et cetera, would be done, and my mom, in her wisdom, I turned 19. 2 days later, I was signed on as a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. 2 days after that, I found myself sitting in the barber chair over at Depot, in B block of Depot, getting a haircut. Now, in preparation for coming out to training, I had gotten a haircut, clean shaven, et cetera, but of course, arriving at Depot, it wasn't short enough, so of course within 10 or 20 minutes after arriving at Depot and getting signed in, getting bedding and assigned my location where I'd be living for the next 6 months, off to the barber shop I had to go and get a haircut. Coming into training was, for me, was a real culture shock. Coming from Newfoundland and having lived a fairly sheltered life up until for the first 19 years of my life, and coming into the prairies, never having been to the prairies before, the flat land and one thing or another. A couple of things were really, I remember significantly is that we were in C block and the railroad track ran by next to the Royal Regina Golf Course. And I'm looking out the window and a train is coming. Now, back home, we lived fairly close to the railroad track, and every time we heard a train going, we'd run to as kids, we'd run to the railroad track and count the cars. Well, a long train in Newfoundland, which was known as the Newfie Bullet, a long train in Newfoundland was 21, 22 cars. Well, I'm sitting there, and first train I see after arriving in Regina, 100, 110, 115, and it ended up, I think, about 122 cars, and I'm just totally amazed at this. You know, like I said, I've been fairly sheltered. Another interesting story that I think you'd be interested in my days of being naive and being sheltered. My mom suggested that when I go to Newfoundland, go to training, that everybody else would be wearing pajamas and I should wear pajamas. Well, my mom, again, bless her heart, went out and bought me 2 pairs of brand new pajamas. And the first night I put them on, and it was the most uncomfortable sleep I'd ever had, because I'd never worn pajamas since I was about 2 years old. Anyway, I got up the next morning, I'm not going to wear these anymore, and I put them in the laundry bag. Well, come laundry time, and I'd never done laundry before, and you're responsible for your own laundry and ironing and what have you. I put the whole bag of laundry in the washing machine. Of course, the last thing to go in was the pajamas, and I thought, well, I had to put Javex in on top of them. Well, I put the Javex in on top. When the washing machine, when the load of wash was finished, nothing left but a waistband of the pajamas. The Javex had eaten it all, because I put the Javex in on top of the dry clothes, what have you. So I thought that was a pretty funny story. A lot of the recruits, a lot of my troop mates and recruits today, because of the toughness of training, they don't particularly care for Saskatchewan and Regina. And it's not, I don't think it's because they don't like Saskatchewan. They're so busy and working so hard to pass recruit training, that I don't think they get to enjoy Saskatchewan as it is. I was a little different. I always liked Saskatchewan. The thing that attracted me to Saskatchewan was the bright sunshine and the wide open spaces. And I mean, there's no way you could feel claustrophobic here in Saskatchewan, I don't think. And I always liked it. I always liked Saskatchewan. So my first interview for postings, of course, I wanted to go back east. I wanted to go to Nova Scotia. I don't remember anywhere else where I wanted to go other than Nova Scotia. After that, my answer was, well, I signed to go anywhere. So if you're asking me where I want to go to Nova Scotia, but I'll go anywhere. And anyway, I ended up in Fredericton, New Brunswick was my first posting. And that was fine. I really enjoyed Fredericton, New Brunswick. I spent the longest 5 days of my life on a train going from Penhold, Alberta to Fredericton Junction. That's how I got from training to Fredericton, to my first posting. I say it was the longest 5 days of my life in that we were on the train. I was 19 years old. I was too young to go into the bar car. I had no friends there. Most of the people that traveled were older people, so there was nobody of my age. And I had you walked from the observation car to your roomette to the observation car. And for 5 days, that's the way it handled. So I often refer to it jokingly that it was the longest 5 days of my life. And then I got into Fredericton and Fredericton Junction in February. And I got off the train, and we thought we had a lot of snow here this winter. In Fredericton Junction, I'm guessing there was 10 or 12 feet of snow there. It was above the bus. The snow was backed up above the bus. I've got into a bus to take me from Fredericton Junction into Fredericton, which was about 20 miles, 25 miles. And I'm sitting on the bus, and I'm looking out, and I got to look up at the top of the snowbanks, and I'm thinking, oh, what did I get myself into here? But anyway, Fredericton, New Brunswick was my first posting, and loved every minute of it. It was an adventure. It was, we lived in barracks. There was 14 of us living in barracks, and all kinds of stories of single guys living in barracks. And the barracks was the third floor of what is now the Lieutenant Governor's house on Woodstock Road in Fredericton. It's a big stone building. Probably, I'm guessing, but I'm probably thinking it was probably built in the early 1900s. Beside it, a carriage house. And there were so many people, so many single guys living in barracks on the 3rd floor that there was no room for myself and my troop mate that arrived in Fredericton. He got transferred to Edmundston, New Brunswick, and I stayed in Fredericton. But so they put us over in the carriage house where they kept the landau and the various horse tack that the Lieutenant Governor had used prior to that. And anyway, there was a couple of beds there, no heat, and we spent probably the better part of a week there at this in this location before a bed came vacant in the barracks, and we then moved into the barracks. And then on the 2nd and 3rd floor, the 1st and 2nd floor of that building was the headquarters, J Division headquarters, and down in the basement of it was the mess where we ate our meals, and we stayed in barracks there. That was my first posting, and I spent about 4 years in New Brunswick, and from there I had 3 other postings in New Brunswick, Fredericton, Chipman, and Perth Andover. And Fredericton, Chipman, Macadam, and Perth Andover were my postings in New Brunswick. I ended up being in charge of Wesleyville Detachment on the east coast of Newfoundland. Wesleyville Detachment is a primarily at one time a fishing village, and of course the Newfoundland fishery is another story. But I was in charge, a corporal in charge with 2 other members on a 3-person detachment. And for the most part, we provided, for the want of a better word, 24-hour service. Most of it we were on call at the time, but we'd do an 8-hour shift and then we're on call the rest of the time. Well, one Monday morning, we got a call from the high school principal that the high school had been broken into, and there was there'd been a safe attack over the weekend. And approximately $1,600 had been taken from the high school safe. And how they come to have the $1,600 there was they had done a fundraising for high school sports teams or whatever, and they had ended up selling chocolate bars for $2. And back then the $2 bill was quite prominent. This was about 1984, I guess. And anyway, we did our usual thing. We went in and looked at the scene, called in ident, took samples of the material from the safe where it had been attacked, and the door had been attacked apparently with some kind of a sharp object, probably a coal chisel or something along that line. And the door was peeled back, and the insulation in the safe was strewn all over the place, and the inside of the safe door was peeled back as well, and the money was gone. Well, we did our investigation. Who'd come and attack a safe in the high school? We started, thinking, and it started eliminating and doing the usual investigation. And about a month later, we got a call from the local supermarket, local grocery store. And I say supermarket, but it was a small grocery store, and it got a call from the owner, and the owner said words to the effect, "Bill, I've got a bunch of $2 bills here that you might be interested in." So and we talked, and one thing, and he kind of beat around the bush. He didn't want to squeal on his neighbor, I guess. He didn't want to inform on his neighbors, what have you. So, okay, so I went down, and sure enough, he had about $30 in $2 bills, about $15 or $20 in $2 bills, and some white powder on these $2 bills. And okay, the first thing that comes to mind is it's come from the safe attack at the high school type thing. So I asked him where he got them. Well, the son of the high school principal had come in and bought a bunch of merchandise from the thing and left. And the owner of the grocery store thought this was rather suspicious, and he put the bills in an envelope and put it in his safe and toyed with the idea, I guess worried about it for about 3 weeks or a month as to what he was going to do with these $2 bills. So anyway, he finally called us. We took the bills as evidence. We sent them to the lab, and sure enough, it came back that the bills had come from the safe attack. The powder on the bills were the same powder, matched up to the powder that came from the safe door. And anyway, we got a warrant for the arrest of the son of the high school principal who had shortly after attacking the safe had moved to Toronto. And we went to Toronto, picked him up, brought him back, and within half an hour after we interviewed him in Toronto, he confessed to attacking the safe. And he also confessed to breaking into the local drugstore and stealing a bunch of jewelry and things like that. And that was just kind of an interesting, I thought, story about living in a small town, how the people of the small town had information and struggled with what they were going to do with it because, again, it belonged to somebody else. It was evidence about somebody else in the small towns. That was one of the cases, I guess, that stands out in my mind as having solved it successfully, only because I think we, at the time, myself and the other two members that I was stationed with, I worked with, had a good relationship with the community. We were well respected. We were well liked. We did a job treating everybody with respect. We were community involved in the community, and I mean even the local criminals had respect for us, I think. And an interesting story about that one. Local criminals having respect for us. We had an individual that was on a recognizance because he was being charged with break and enters, a numerous long string of break and enters, and he was brought to court and he was released on his own recognizance. And one of the conditions was that he had to report to the local detachment twice a week. Tuesdays and Fridays. Well, being a 3-person detachment, many times there was nobody there at the detachment, but I lived in quarters and my wife and family and I lived above the detachment, and my wife was out sunbathing one day in the backyard, and along comes this guy, bangs on the door at the detachment. There's nobody there to answer the door, but he sees my wife there, so he yells over the fence. He says, "Mrs.," he says, "would you tell the constable that I reported for my report today?" So she again, and she knew who it was, knew the individual by name, but this is how the people, I thought respected us, how friendly they were, how supportive they were. That hey, he knew that what he had to do, and he did it, and he did it with respect, and we treated him with respect as well. My experience here has been that 95 to 98% of the young men and women that come in are there. They have a vision in mind. They want to be police officers. They probably have the same dream that I had. Or I shouldn't say that. Back in the 70s, in the 80s and 90s, when I was, and I've been away from there now for about 15 years, but they had this desire to be in the mounted police as a career. What I'm hearing from a lot of sources now is that a lot of the recruits coming in it's not a career. They come in, they want to try it. If they don't like it, they plan on moving on somewhere else. Back in the 60s when I came into training, and even in the 80s when I came back as an instructor, most of the people coming in, it was a career. It was an obsession. It was a way of life. It was, now I may be wrong about that, and somebody else can tell you different, but these young people, for the most part, came in with the desire to learn, to get out and for the want of a better word, fight crime, to make a difference in the Canadian culture and Canadian landscape. They wanted to learn, to graduate, and then get out and do actual police work. Yeah. A couple of things that I found that depending on where these people were from, gave them a sense of you could really tell a difference between the maritime boy, the prairie boy, somebody from Southern Ontario, somebody from Lower Mainland BC. Lower Mainland BC, not that I'm being critical, Lower Mainland BC and Southern Ontario, these people were a lot more aggressive, a lot more assertive is probably a better word. Very, very confident in their attitude. Whereas the kid that came in from the Maritimes for the most part, or from Saskatchewan, were more reserved, were more not as aggressive, not as assertive, more naive probably, like I was when I came from training, but they all pooled together. They all pulled together, pooled and pulled together, and after 6 months, you could see quite a difference in these individuals. It seemed like the more assertive people were a little more mellow, and the more mellow people were a little more assertive. And again, it goes back to that one for all for one, because the training in the 60s, 70s, 80s, again, if one person in the troop got in trouble, everybody was in trouble. And so it taught us to work as a unit, and ended up being beneficial years later out in working on a detachment in a team or as a group of people doing police work. Probably the biggest thing was the October crisis of 1970. In the October crisis of 1970, I was a young 22-year-old, 23-year-old member in Montreal. And back then, we were single. We were, enjoying life, go to work in the morning, had our circle of friends and enjoyed our friends in the evenings and things like that. And as an adult, I look back on the situation, that October crisis, and that scares me now that I'm 65 years old, more than it did when I was 22 years old, in that the military was there with automatic weapons, all kinds of military vehicles rolling around. The FLQ were bombing mailboxes, mailboxes and cars, and we were there to do investigations on these and provide security for the MPs and some of the MLAs. And the Laporte murder, the Laporte funeral, for instance, I was a young 22, 23-year-old member providing support, security on and I forget the member of parliament that I provided security for, and we were there with a .38 snub-nose revolver, and never thinking that somebody was going to take shots at us or fire at us or threaten the life of this member of parliament. I mean, we were there to provide security for sure, but the idea that no vests, we had a .38 snub nose and a suit jacket over us, and that was the extent of it. And never thought that it was an issue or that we were in danger. And now, you asked the question, do I reminisce and look back over my service? And sometimes I think about that and I think, boys, were we ever naive about that? And were we ever lucky that, and maybe the FLQ wasn't that much of a terrorist group, I say that in that so many things could have happened by today's standards, but that was in the 70s and a different time, a different era. Same thing right now. Different time, I say a different time, different era. My son, I go visit my son and he's off to work. He straps on a bulletproof vest, a Cavalier vest. Straps on a 9mm pistol. He straps on a taser. Goes to the office, and before he goes out in the police car, he's probably taking a shotgun with him as well. And I understand now the force are looking at semi-automatic carbines type thing as part of the firearms to deal with the war. Back, like I said, back in the October crisis, we had a five-shot snub-nose .38 special. That was our protection type thing. My days on patrol, both in Wesleyville, in Newfoundland, in New Brunswick, and PEI, those were places I was stationed. Many days we didn't even wear a firearm to go out on patrol. And finally, word came down from headquarters that, hey, if you're in a marked car driving in uniform, you will wear firearms type thing. And it was about 1971, 72 before we were wearing firearms steadily type thing. And again, no additional firearms other than the office and each detachment was issued with a brushmaster, a Winchester brushmaster, and a .308 rifle, but they were kept locked up in the exhibit rooms. Then ended up marrying a girl from Saskatchewan, from Simpson, Saskatchewan. I say jokingly again, I made the mistake of marrying a girl from Saskatchewan. Being a Newfoundlander, I have grandkids here in Saskatchewan now, and being a Newfoundlander, I can't go back to Newfoundland even if I wanted to. The grandkids keep me here, of course. My son has followed in my footsteps and is a member of the force, presently stationed in Meadow Lake. He has about 7-year service right now, and I have 2 beautiful granddaughters that are the love of my life. Like I say, I take a lot of pride in them. I enjoy them. I spend as much time as I possibly can with them, and very proud of my son. Mind you, I've got 2 other children besides, but also equally proud of them as well. But my son followed in my footsteps, and probably one of the proudest moments that I've in my service. Well, actually, I was retired at the time, but when my son graduated, I got to present him with his badge at his graduation, and it was a proud moment for me.